The Sri Lankan presidential palace. It is a seat of power in the island nation. For years, it has been inaccessible to the public, but not this weekend. This weekend, protesters stormed into the imposing mansion, calling for Gotabaya Rajapaksa to step down. In our next report, we take you inside the presidential palace, as our correspondent Dasuni Athauda tells you how it is the island's new symbol of people power.
The presidential palace in Sri Lanka is an imposing structure. It was built during the colonial era. Since the last 200 years, it has embodied state authority. But on Saturday, it was the island's new symbol of people power. Thousands of citizens barged into the presidential palace. After months of protests triggered by the island nation's economic meltdown, they were angry and they wanted the president out. The dramatic events forced Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee. Calm has now returned to the streets, but the palace has become almost a tourist spot. Men, women and children streamed into the imposing mansion, all in a bid to sit on Gotabaya Rajapaksa's chair. Most refused to leave until Rajapaksa steps down.
The queue you see all around me is somewhat of a special queue because these Sri Lankans are now standing in line, impatiently waiting to enter the official residence of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, which was completely open to the public following the mass rally that took place on the 9th of July. All of these people, quite literally showing up in their thousands, are eagerly anticipating to enter the president's official residence just to have a glimpse of the life of a president here in Sri Lanka.
The main attraction was the palace's swimming pool. Shortly after the capture, many dived into the presidential pool to cool off. Protesters were filmed swimming and enjoying. But by Sunday, the waters had turned murky. Now only a handful were willing to dive in. Many even lounged on Rajapaksa's four-poster bed. Others took over the president's gym. Some lifted weights. Some sweated it out on the treadmills. While the others were just happy exercising their power.
It is a victorious moment for the protesters and also the Sri Lankans. And this place was not allowed to visit earlier. And as you can see, people are pouring continuously and right now, and they're visiting this building, the President House.
Absolutely, we'll be very happy for the president to step down. But I'm telling you, he's no more our president. We have chased him out. So we have won this battle without any weapon, without any bad thing happening to our children. We have won this battle.
As people went from room to room, they wanted to document everything. Taking selfies in front of teakwood desks and priceless paintings. The heavily armed presidential guards are still around. But this time, they mingled with the new visitors. Some even posed for selfies with the excited citizens.
The queue to go visit or get a glimpse of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's official residence mimics pretty much every other queue in Sri Lanka, with intertwining queues with no end in sight, and Sri Lankans standing in hope and anticipation just to see what the life of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was like until he fled this very location, which was once a high security zone. When speaking to the public who are standing in line, their voice and mood is quite unanimous.
Outside the mansion, the manicured sprawling lawn is the new picnic spot. Families enjoy a day out here, as volunteers offer food to protesters as well as security forces.
They come here in the morning to see what wonders we find at Gota's palace.
And what did you see?
But there's nothing valuable, only unnecessary things.
What do you think about the current situation?
Country should go to the better side, but it'll take a long time.
The corridors of power in Sri Lanka are full of people. The excitement in their voices is evident. This is a place they were not allowed in just days ago. But today, it is their playground. And at least symbolically, they now control the new corridors of power. Dasuni Athauda, reporting from Colombo for WION World is One.
And what does this people's movement really mean for Sri Lanka? With us on the broadcast this minute from London is Alan Keenan. He is a senior consultant on Sri Lanka for the International Crisis Group. Thanks very much, Alan, for being here with us. What do you make of these scenes that have been coming in from Sri Lanka? What is your assessment of what lies ahead?
Well, they're pretty incredible scenes, as you just showed, and I think anybody from any country in the world is going to be struck by just the massive numbers of people and by the breaching of what used to be pretty much a fortress, a number of different fortresses actually in Colombo, with some resistance from security forces, but with very, very few injuries, and with the protesters themselves not using weapons, just their bodies. It's a really quite an amazing democratic moment, I think, where the people literally rise up and enter into the spaces of power, as your reporter was just saying. Of course, it's a mixed bag because it's an expression of, and it's generated by immense economic suffering, and suffering which is not looking like it will go away anytime soon. So all those people, the fact that many of those people traveled great distances with great hardship to come and express their desire for a change and for the removal of Gotabaya Rajapaksa and of the Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, and for a system change, as many are calling it, that comes from great suffering. It wasn't happening a year ago. It comes because there's very little food and higher prices on everything, no gas, no cooking gas, no petrol. So even in the midst of this great moment, is generated by great hardship. And in the end, which story will emerge in the end as the more dominant one, the one of hope or the one of sort of despair and potential a worsening of the situation? I think that remains to be seen.
Right, like you're saying, the suffering on the ground, the mounting anger and frustration which has now taken the shape of this uprising. So at the heart of this is the urgent need to address the economic challenges. How do you see this people's movement influencing the country's ability to actually tackle the economic challenges and the financial crisis? Do you see this triggering any concrete structural reforms according to you?
Well, I mean, again, it cuts both ways. I mean, in one sense, it slows things down because you don't have a government for a few days, possibly for a month, a week. You have greater uncertainty. The markets and sort of bondholders and others in the the global economic structures don't really like uncertainty. So it complicates things in one sense, but it also, I think, makes clear that what has to happen is not merely the removal of a few people at the top, although I think the Rajapaksas, particularly Gotabaya, are directly responsible for a large portion of this crisis. Had they managed things differently, had they listened to voices of the people or even the voices of the elite, of a lot of the elite, they might not have gotten themselves in this pickle and gotten the whole country into a terrible crisis. But I think what this recent upsurge and massive mobilization of people also makes clear is that much deeper changes are needed, and hopefully those will be insisted upon by the IMF and by the major governments that fund the IMF and by all governments with influence, that there needs to be constitutional change, not just a change at the top, There needs to be fundamental change to the structure of government. There needs to be a set of new institutions and revitalized institutions that can work to prevent corruption, that can help oversee economic decision making, so that crazy ideas like many of those of Gotabaya, whether it's his massive tax cuts or his ban on fertilizer imports, that those kinds of ideas are not possible, or if they are made, that they can be reversed when sensible people give their advice. So you need those kinds of big reforms. You need accountability also for the massive levels of corruption that have been seen not just under the Rajapaksas but in years before. So those sort of reforms need to be insisted upon by the international community in exchange for large-scale economic support. At the same time, what shouldn't be negotiated and what shouldn't be held to any kind of conditions is major humanitarian assistance, particularly food, but some sort of support to get enough oil for the country to run and for the economy to get up and running, and medicines, and a whole range of humanitarian needs, which the UN and the International Red Cross has articulated in recent appeals. So those need to be funded. They need to be funded massively, and they need to be funded quickly if Sri Lanka isn't going to dissolve into much greater crisis. Because this, as I was saying, this is a great democratic moment in one sense, but it's also fraught. If the suffering continues and if people see a new government come into power, or maybe a series of new governments see further political instability, economic policies aren't sorted out, foreign money doesn't come in, then you could see much worse happening. You could see real violence and born of despair and anger and desperation. So the international community, even as it insists on deep structural reforms, needs to be very generous if that kind of much worse crisis is to be avoided.
Alan Keenan, appreciate very much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing those perspectives.
You're very welcome.
WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.